Good morning and a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us today. I'm Henrik Larsen, I'm Director for UNDP's Nordic office. We have a devastating war in Ukraine, a country that was once in rapid development, a country that not only provided for its own citizens, but fed 400 million people around the world, has seen its trajectory abruptly cut off. The war in Ukraine has also reminded us how one crisis can spark another, sometimes of an entirely different nature in a different corner of the world. As the destruction intensifies, the government of Ukraine estimates cost of damages of $700 billion and over the next 10 years as public buildings, road, bridges, hospitals, schools, energy infrastructure, and other pieces have been destroyed. We are joined today by a distinguished group of diplomats, experts, and practitioners to hear their take on what is at stake and how the international community can best support Ukraine, supporting on the immediate needs while also looking at the best ways for recovery. We have a distinguished panel waiting for you, but before that, please allow me to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Mikhailo Voynichyn, Ambassador to Ukraine, of Ukraine to Denmark. Ivana Zivkovic, Assistant Secretary General, UNDP Regional Director for Europe and CIS. We will also have with us, should have with us shortly, State Secretary Lotte Macron. I should say that we are recording the proceedings and we have national radio with us. And let me, without further ado, ask our Assistant Secretary General, Ivana Zivkovic, to join us on the stage for her keynote speech.
Good morning, esteemed guests, dear colleagues. Today's topic of discussion is of great importance. Is this okay? As we continue to observe heavy destruction and human suffering due to the war in Ukraine. I just visited Ukraine and was deeply touched and humbled by the strength and resilience of the people I have met. The scars of the war are heavily apparent. Nevertheless, people are trying to go about their lives despite repeated attacks, often with no basic services or power. The war in Ukraine has put to test our multilateral system. The multilateral system has proven successful in many instances. It has provided for a platform to support the people of Ukraine's resilience. It helped addressing key humanitarian issues and has even brokered the notable humanitarian evacuation of Azovstal. It has also enabled the world to avoid a deeper food crisis, including through establishment of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And in addition, it has enabled sustaining the provision of essential services, including in the energy sector. The most acute crisis the country is witnessing today is the energy crisis, which has a direct effect on provision of essential services from heating to water supplies to education and health. The energy crisis is impacting all sectors of the economy, and it's hindering the country's aptitude to address immediate needs and remain productive. For a country that has been considered the breadbasket of the world, today 90% of the people are at a risk of poverty, and many of the development gains recorded by the country are at risk of complete reversal. Preventing such dramatic reversals is why UNDP has made an unwavering commitment to support the government of Ukraine and its people in boosting resilience and preparing for recovery, in addition to supporting the UN-led humanitarian response. Despite the deteriorating security situation, UNDP stayed and is delivering support with more than 380 personnel and soon increasing to more than 500, working across Ukraine. While we continue working on immediate priorities and ensuring that we are not only sustaining the resilience of the Ukrainian people, We paved the way for a recovery that would start immediately with a green, inclusive, digital, and just outlook. We at UNDP do not sequence our interventions. We see our immediate resilience building work as an integral part of recovery of a mid to long-term outlook. This is why we approach our programming through the Nexus approach, prioritizing humanitarian development balancing. Before the war, Ukraine was on a steady path of progress on all SDG targets and was recording several achievements on its recovery path, on its reform path, including on enhancing transparency and accountability, which remains a key priority today. For UNDP, protecting development gains implies continuous investment and engagement with all stakeholders, government, civil society, private sector, to ensure that the key principles of efficiency, inclusivity, sustainability, transparency, and accountability are preserved in the recovery and reconstruction trajectory. Critical areas of our work include sustaining support to reform processes and modernization of administration. Despite the war, UNDP continued to support the Ministry of Digital Transformation and other sectoral ministries to ensure that modernization of the administration remains a priority and is geared towards the immediate needs of the displaced persons. Secondly, we investing in the green and sustainable transition that Ukraine has started prior to the war. This pertains specifically to the energy sector, which is currently being examined to ensure that its restoration is done in line with international standards and with clear diversification and a greener outlook. It also pertains to the reconstruction sector, which would be based on energy efficiency as a key principle. The third area of our work includes building of a new support ecosystem for the business sector, especially MSMEs. Micro, small, and medium enterprises, we ensure that they receive appropriate support to sustain their businesses and to create jobs. Ukraine's MSME form 90% of the overall economic activity. We also, important part of our work is engagement with civil society, which remains critical both from a service delivery perspective, but it is also critical that non-governmental organizations are involved in planning and monitoring the implementations of various projects. Denmark has always been a strong partner and supporter for UNDP, and in Ukraine we have worked together in the East prior to the war. I wish hereby to thank the government of Denmark for its continuous support and for its contribution to mine action, democratization and human rights, anti-corruption and civil society strengthening programming. And a few words on Moldova, dear colleagues. We cannot overlook the far-reaching consequences of the war in Ukraine on Moldova. Only last year, Moldova has experienced 34% inflation, a 7-fold increase in natural gas costs, large increases in electricity costs, and major supply chain disruptions. UNDP assisted the government in designing a compensation scheme to minimize the negative impact of energy inflation on vulnerable households. We are also working on the socio-economic inclusion of refugees through access to labor markets, to services, and justice for all. Let me end by expressing my gratitude for the enormous support provided by you, our strategic partners, to our work in Ukraine and the region. We hope to have you on board in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ASD Ivana Živković. And without further ado, can I invite State Secretary for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark, Lotte Macron, to join us. Hey, good morning. Hey, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, all. And logistics can be a difficult thing, but here I am, just in time. So hello and good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. I am indeed very happy to be here among partners and friends. I just returned from a visit to Mykolaiv, close to the front line, where I went with the new Danish Minister for Development, Cooperation and Global Climate. It was his first visit abroad, the first visit of a Danish government representative to Mykolaiv, and it was an important show of our solidarity to the Ukrainian people and to the city of Mykolaiv. Mykolaiv is now known as the City of Heroes. I got a T-shirt, I'm wearing it today, known for their stern fighting, spirit of all of them in face of the Russian invasion, determined to fight back for their own self-determination, freedom and democracy. It was clear from our visit that this fighting spirit is easily transferred or translated into a fight also for getting their city back on their feet, but also very clear how much they need and how much the people of Ukraine need all of our support. First, of course, the acute humanitarian assistance and recovery, not only, of course, in Mykolaiv, but across Ukraine, but also the need for humanitarian mine clearance as a desperate need for us to do much more on the mine side. And thirdly, of course, while we do these humanitarian acute needs, we must keep perspective, or the long-term perspective, at hand. As I've said also in conversations yesterday, if there is any place in the world that we should, as development and humanitarian partners, get the nexus right, it's here, the humanitarian development and peace nexus. And then, of course, fourthly, and this is also part of our support, we must continue to help support the Ukrainian state that is actually there. It's not necessarily a very strong state, but there are strong state structures to build on to help them provide for themselves. So, I mean, all these four tracks are part of the Danish multifaceted assistance to Ukraine. We have so far supported with almost 200 million euros in response to civilian and humanitarian needs. And we do this, of course, together with all of you. It's nothing that we can do alone. We do it with our partners from the UN, with the EU, and with the civil society, and not least also with the private sector. Working together, and I think our conference today is a demonstration of this, is absolutely decisive if we are to succeed in Ukraine. Looking ahead, Denmark, the new Danish government, is determined to continue to be among the strongest, most reliable, and also greatest, relative to size, partners to Ukraine. The focus is not only to build back, but build back better, greener, and more reliable. Now, a few other points. If we are to succeed, we must get the international cooperation right. We, from the inside, of course, fully support the overall national coordination and the sector approach to Ukraine's reconstruction. And it's important, and I would like to stress this again and again, that we need to get Ukraine in the driver's seat. They need to be first and foremost the one who is driving the processes and the initiatives. We must avoid parallel structures. We welcome from the Danish side the recent initiatives by the EU and the G7+ to ensure a coordinated effort of the support to Ukraine. But one thing that we have also made clear is that the UN must have a prominent role here, and that we would like to see that reflected more, including also the civil society organizations. And again, let me say that we're also pushing for a very strong anchor in Kiev when we do see through on these international coordination structures. Secondly, let me just highlight how we, and I guess this conference is part of that we need to work on a holistic approach to reconstruction with the necessary inclusion of economic, social, political aspects. So we lay the foundation on the one hand for sustainable development, leaving no one behind, including IDPs, but also to create a platform or lay the groundwork for the necessary reforms in Ukraine, also to help them get towards EU membership or EU integration. In that respect, Denmark is heading the implementation of the EU anti-corruption initiative called EU AC, another abbreviation, because fighting corruption will play a key part of getting Ukraine back on its feet. And as the mayor of Mykolaiv said when we met him, he said, I actually don't believe in people, I believe in structures. And of course it's a, it's a very prominent way of putting it, but what they've actually done is they have solicited or outlisted the many of the efforts to UN to do the calls for rebuilding the infrastructure to combat corruption, and of course we support that. Also broad inclusion, youth and women, let's not forget those. As my t-shirt underlined, Denmark has a special focus on the city of Mykolaiv. That was a task that we were given by the President Zelensky, and we took it up. We actually consider our city-country cooperation as a valuable add-on, not as a competition to a more nationwide or sector-based approach, but as an add-on. I think we can do both, working on two legs. It gives us, from the Danish side, a sort of a possibility to work with a whole of society approach, a sort of a more people-to-people cooperation involving both the public and the private sector. And I'm actually proud that the Danish cooperation with Mykolaiv is already recognized and is seen as a model of how to do this country-to-city cooperation. Let me just close by underscoring that Denmark will stand firm with the Ukrainian people in their fight for freedom, democracy, and self-determination. We remain fully committed to continue our support as long as it takes, and we will do it with you. The international political commitment to the reconstruction of Ukraine must be long-term, it must be holistic, and it must be coordinated in order for us to build back better and greener and leaving no one behind. And most importantly, I came back with this sense of a remarkable Ukrainian leadership that we should tap in on and which must be front and center in everything we do when we try to build resilience, reconstruction, and developing for the future in a time of war. Thank you very much.
State Secretary Lotte Macron, thank you so much. Please have a seat. Thank you so much for this account, both of your personal visit, your takeaways from your visit, but also the expression of support from the government of Denmark. At this stage, I'm very pleased to introduce our panel for today. And if I can ask panel members to join me on the stage, starting with His Excellency Mikhailo Vydojnik, Ambassador of Ukraine to Denmark. Please. Charlotte Slinde, Secretary General, Danish Refugee Council. Henrik Nordentoft, representative UNHCR's representation to the Nordics and the Baltic countries. Torben Huus, Executive Director, Investment Fund for Developing Countries. Christopoulos Politis, Deputy Resident Representative, UNDP in Ukraine. And finally, Dima Al-Khatib, Resident Representative, UNDP in Moldova. Can I ask you to get you to the other side? And we get, good. Panel members, to get us started, can I just have a quick reaction from each of you? Ukraine is at war, and the human suffering and needs of the population are growing by the day. Is it at all meaningful to talk about long-term development, and if so, why? A quick reaction, maybe, Ambassador?
Thank you very much. Yes, it's the right time to talk about that, and that's actually what Ukraine and our president started talking about already, maybe the next week when war started. That gives us first assurance that we will win this war. Second, that we are not losing time because we already now thinking how to rebuild Ukraine. And third, we already started dialogue with our partners on that path. That's extremely important to have partners also together with us to achieve this goal.
Thank you, Ambassador. We'll come back to that in a second. Charlotte Slende, quick reaction from you.
Yes, I believe the same. I mean, we are facing a winter here with very harsh conditions without electricity, water supplies, heating, due to the destruction of infrastructure, including hospitals, schools, houses for civilians. So we need to look into that situation. And at the same time, we do see people who continue to suffer and do need humanitarian life-saving assistance as the war drags on. So we very much believe that these two or three elements, humanitarian development and peace, need to walk hand in hand. And as Ivana said, it's in tandem, it's not sequential, if we need to make progress on all strands in a coordinated fashion. Thank you.
Thanks for that quick reaction. Christopoulos, Politis.
Thank you. Very much in the same vein, actually. The humanitarian development nexus has started and has been in full swing as of day one of the war. Ukraine's specificity and the fact that state institutions were functioning, not only the institutions but also the capacities that were both at central and subnational level were such that it was inconceivable that to work on a humanitarian path or a humanitarian focus without really looking at the mid to longer term development. And I would like to emphasize also the importance of us looking at building the strong foundation of a strong recovery, a green, inclusive, accountable recovery as we move forward and as we focus today at the most immediate humanitarian needs. Thank you.
Let's turn to you, Henrik Nordentoft. Quick reaction.
It's difficult to come as number 4 and try to find more things to agree with than has already been said. But just to say that the development really sets a direction for how the humanitarian action needs to be synced. So when we talk about working in tandem, it's also to be inspired by each other and making sure there is good synergies across.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Quick reaction from Dima, starting with you.
Sure. I'll speak from Moldova's angle. With the majority of the refugees being hosted in homes, with the domino effect of the war in Ukraine on the social, economic, environmental, political spaces, definitely the approach is a humanitarian development nexus and its implementation. So it has to go hand in hand, and it has been the case. And we're very proud to be on the forefront of that. Thanks.
How does it look from the private sector and the investment perspective?
Well, we can come back to that, but I'll just say in the timing-wise, I mean, the financial requirements to rebuild Ukraine are enormous and will need the involvement of the private sector. And I think now is the timing to have the dialogue and understand and mobilize this to be prepared to take on this enormous task once the conditions are right.
Thank you. Thank you. Ambassador, let me come back to you. The government of Ukraine leads the crisis response, but also the National Recovery and Reconstruction Plan, a huge and almost insurmountable task. How can the international community best support Ukraine in ways that help the government at central and local level to deliver, but also that connects the immediate needs with where Ukraine wants to be?
Actually, you are already helping. I mean, this is world community, and that's extremely needed now. Starting from the very first day of the war, we knew that without the support of our partners, unfortunately, we will lose this war, and the repercussions it might have for the rest of the world will be huge. That is why, since the very first day, we united efforts how to protect my country first, but also we already started discussing how to rebuild it in the future and how to meet the urgent needs which are now of our people. So it's extremely needed to help you, to have your hand of support for many reasons. First, let me be frank. You already had maybe when we preparing the conference a figure more than $7 billion of US dollar of damage Russia already caused to Ukraine. It's a huge amount which Ukraine unfortunately do not have. Second, we need your expertise, because the president mentioned, and also Lotte said, let's build back better. It's extremely important because Ukraine wants to be a member of the EU, so the goal is to rebuild Ukraine, which would fit the EU requirements. And third, it's a unique chance also for us all to use this opportunity, because in my opinion, the reconstruction of Ukraine will be a big driver for the whole economy, not just in Europe, but in the world. So if we manage to succeed in these goals, believe me, we will see a very huge growth, not just inside Ukraine, but also outside. That is why it's a win-win situation when we have partners with us now.
Good. Thank you, Ambassador. Torben Huus, you represent the Danish development finance institution, IFU. Your organization had quite a lot of investments in Ukraine before, in the agricultural sector, in renewable energy, for example. How do you see the pathways to come back and see private sector investments coming back into Ukraine?
Yeah, thank you. It's correct. We have over the years invested in 60 private companies in Ukraine, and before the war started, we had 14 investments in Ukraine, financed by IFU and also Danish institutional investors within agriculture and renewable energy, supplying about 368 megawatts of energy to Ukraine. With our experiences, that we believe that development finance institutions like IFU will play an important role as first movers investing into Ukraine. Involving the private sector on a larger scale will require sort of a more stable situation on the battlefield. It will also require some political risk insurance schemes that we need to establish. And I think these will be key to mobilize the financing from the private sector outside Ukraine, which is required. And and providing and de-risking these projects will allow the private sector to go in and have a lower return requirement on their investments, which will translate into, let's say, lower energy prices in Ukraine for the investments in renewable energy. So I think this is really the discussion we need to have, how we on a, let's say, broader scale, European scale, can set up mechanisms that can de-risk politically the private sector investments in a transitional phase.
Good. Thank you, Torben. Christopoulos Politis, you represent UNDP, an agency that is asked to think about development, think about the long term from day one. How do you do that in practice? How do you leverage, for example, innovation, digitalization, green transformation to meet both immediate needs and the long-term development?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. And of course, I would like to underscore two key principles, firstly, before diving very immediately into a practical example that will illustrate how we do that, actually, in action. It is important for us to underscore the importance of resilience, which comes very much hand in hand with humanitarian support and assistance. And my colleague from UNHCR has underscored it. It is setting the stage, but it is also the humanitarian assistance and needs are setting the stage, but also putting a framework of action that needs to be very much complemented by a strong investment in the resilience of the people, of the institutions, of the systems. And this is what Lotte was mentioning earlier, a state that has systems that we need to strengthen its resilience. And while the energy crisis remains a very important element that everybody in the room is supporting, I will divert a little bit the discussion and use a different example, although the energy would have given me a very green, transformative angle as well. But let me dive a little bit with all of you on public services. And that has been also an illustration that gives us how, or a platform to work very much in tandem with all our humanitarian colleagues and partners, to also with the state. As soon as the war started, people started moving. And the IDP situation today, while more or less reversing, I would say, because we used to have 7 million, we have almost 6 million IDPs in the country, but we still have many people abroad, public services were at the core, were at the center of making sure to alleviate the hardship, to alleviate the impact of war. Alleviate the impact of war on men and women, but also in specific women with families who had fled the conflict and the front lines. So public services, we looked at those and unpacked them jointly with local authorities and the Ministry of Digital Transformation in introducing services that were targeted. So there was a lot of leverage of the work we had done as UNDP, but also spearheaded by the Ministry of Digital Transformation in establishing services that were geared to the specific context, to the specific needs of IDPs, like accessing civil registry, accessing cash assistance, so all these elements in terms of digitalization were embedded, but were also taken immediately into a context reality. Innovation, I would say, although it's not super innovative, but when you think of a context that where this solution might be innovation, and I will take Ambassador the Snaps example, which are actually mobile snaps. The snaps are practically public service delivery centers that are usually in public buildings, but we worked jointly with the support of Denmark, and I want to here underscore the tremendous support Denmark has put forward in supporting the East, Mykolaiv, but also pre-war the East Oblast, the Eastern Oblast. We transformed the snaps into mobile snaps and made sure that the snaps were existing throughout the country. But also currently we're looking very much closely, and I will stop there, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also with the Ministry of Digital Transformation and the Ministry of Justice to make sure that those services are also digitalized but available in host countries, quote unquote, Poland in specific, because in all countries that have more than 1 million Ukrainians residing currently in those countries. So I'll stop there and we'll take questions later. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Dima Al-Khatib, let me turn briefly to you. We heard the Ukraine representative talk on digitalization, talked about innovation, for example. You work in Ukraine to support both a host population and a refugee population. Can I have a quick reaction from you on the work that was done before, that is done in crisis, and how you think long term?
Extremely important. Can you hear me? Yeah. Very important to really keep an angle, as we say, on modernizing, supporting institutions as we move along with the supporting the humanitarian aspects. And I'll give also another concrete example to illustrate the digitalization support. In addition to supporting Moldova and putting the first ever digital transformation strategy, we have supported also the government in establishing a compensation mechanism for energy poor, energy vulnerable, including establishing an online platform, having an on-bill compensation mechanism, and ensuring that the data that are being extracted from that system is used for future planning. So it was a complete process from assessment to setting a mechanism, setting the policies, to implementation, and to actual compensations that were fully transparent and that triggered the support of several donors, including Germany, including Sweden, and including the EU. And it is now an up and running mechanism that will continue forever under the auspices of a national institution using digital tools. I hope that.
Thank you so much. Let me open up for a second for reflections on what you heard. Is it possible to think about long-term development at a time of crisis? Can I have a couple of reactions? Katarina Amitsbøl, you'll get a microphone.
Thank you so much for this conference, and thank you to the panelists for your excellent intervention and the speakers. I think it's this about doing things hand in hand and parallel. You have to also think about at the same time the sequence, and when Torben Huss is thinking about the financial investments, Charlotte Slende also talked about the energy sector. These are obviously longer term investments, because it's structure and it's infrastructure. So therefore, I think it's very important you both think short-sighted, but also very long-term, and as Lotte Macron said, building back better and greener. So particularly on the green side, energy side, water supply, that is the long-term, and the anti-corruptions and the structure and institutions, while you're doing the more short-term humanitarian assistance.
Thank you, Ms. Amitsbøl. Other reactions? Yes, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Julia Arnfred Bøjsen. I'm the director of the Ukrainian Danish Youth House. And I'm also very happy to see this nexus coming forward, because we're working to support the democratic participation of youth in Ukraine and cultural exchange. And we started before the invasion, and we're continuing now. And we really experience with the young people that we meet in Ukraine and that we work with, that there is a really, really big demand for some, let's call it maybe mental, intellectual humanitarian aid, if you could call it that, because the resilience that the Ukrainian people shows doesn't come from from nothing. So we also need to keep in mind that they need a place to debate, to be active in democracy, and to be actually included in the processes. So I also would like to just emphasize the importance of including young people, including civil society, also in these processes that we're supporting on the more structural level, because that's the way it can last, like it also has been said before. But we really, really see a big need and a big hunger for that. Also, not to mention the fact that most young people have gotten their education disrupted in a very brutal manner. So there is a really big need to get some other kind of insights and reflections in place as well, so that they can keep going and build the country that they want to have in the future. Thank you.
Highlighting the importance of voices into the recovery process, to the government leadership, stressing that of young people. Also an experience from Ukraine, I believe. Grateful if you would introduce yourself. You're getting a microphone right away.
Hello. Yeah, I think I have. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, dear panelists, and for very interesting debate, and thank you, Henrik. Yes, I used to work for UNDP in Kiev until recently for 2 years, and now I'm with the Istanbul Regional Hub as advisor on democracy, human rights, and good governance. My comment is indeed related to Ukraine, and first of all, it's really admirable, I think, for all of us to see this resilience from the people of Ukraine and from the government. And I couldn't agree more with Chris that, you know, the importance of sustaining these structures, you know, both within the civil society but also within the governance, and, you know, even the national human rights institution that keep working. The parliament were meeting even in February, March, and they keep meeting. But one thing which comes to my mind as a really, really key, important issue is, and maybe this is to Torben Haas, is when IFO and private sector is engaging with investment now, is really the key importance that this investment is done in a responsible manner. We have now, Ukraine became an EU candidate country in June last year. And here we have a directive proposal now on responsible business, and on which also relates to the EU Green Deal. So human rights, business and human rights is an area that UNDP in Ukraine is working a lot with. We also collaborate with the Danish Institute for Human Rights. And I think it's really, really important to sustain the businesses. We saw the businesses are coming back to Ukraine. Again, they're extremely resilient. But when we invest, you know, how can we do this in a responsible manner? This is a triple win for the citizen, for the state in terms of tax revenues, and it's a big win also for the businesses, as they are 40% of the export sector in Ukraine before the war was going to the EU market. So just a comment, and I'm hoping that there will be much cooperation between IFO and the UNDP and donors like Denmark in this field. Thank you.
Good. So I'll let the panel respond in a second on that issue of say, sustaining what was already there, bringing back more, but also making sure, as much as we need private sector investments, that there will be demands on responsible practices. Charlotte Slinde, let me turn to you for a second. You represent one of the largest Danish NGOs very much engaged in support of Ukraine. Could you give a practical example on that bridge, on the responses to the immediate needs, while having the longer term perspective in mind?
Yeah, thank you very much, Henrik. I'd like to take the example of our work on humanitarian disarmament in Ukraine, and reflect a little bit on the critical undertaking of addressing that vast explosive ordnance contamination that we see as a prerequisite actually for recovery in the country. The scale and the humanitarian impact of the explosive ordnance contamination is actually quite unimaginable. A territory the size 5 times Denmark is estimated to be contaminated. Those were figures that were given to me when I met with the state emergency services in Kiev a few months back. 10 million people need actually mine clearance activities for their lives to be able to continue. So to address this vast explosive ordnance contamination, it is actually a prerequisite for recovery and an enabler also for safe returns of internally displaced, and resumption also of key services and key economic activities in the country. So obviously the life-saving aspect of mine clearances is maybe the most evident. Landmine and explosive ordnance clearance removes the immediate threat to life, but it is a very long process and a time-consuming and a very costly affair. And it requires also to work on risk education as a critical factor of mine clearance. In our work here, we work in close coordination and partnership with the state emergency services. So this is about, we cannot work in mine clearance, and DRC was the first international NGO that was actually accepted as a partner to the state emergency services to help and assist in clearing mines in Ukraine. Yeah. So that is a close partnership per se. And so the state emergency services lay out the territory that they want us to assist with, and lay out sort of the plans for that. And actually the Ukrainian authorities are also the ones who actually do the clearance in the field. So there you need a very strong cooperation, and you also need, that mine clearance to take place in order for farmers to be able to get back, children to be able to go back to schools, IDPs to be able to return. But then working on mine risk education, which is a very important component as well. If you need want a big outreach to people, since mine clearance will take decades, you need to educate the population in how to avoid the risk of landmines and ordinances, and that risk education, to spread that out widely, you need to work very closely with a number of actors, including civil society actors in countries, with schools, with media, and across borders, also with refugees in other countries. So that's a broad endeavor where we assist and build capacity also of other organizations involving themselves in this work. So that is just an example of how that partnership is necessary, but also how mine action is a humanitarian endeavor, but it also paves the way for the longer term recovery of Ukraine.
Yeah, I would like some reflections on that from your fellow panel members, but before Henrik Nordentoft, let me ask more or less the same question to you. You represent the UN agency leading on the support for forcibly displaced people. On that link between the immediate needs that you are often responsible for in the longer term, and also within the UN system, how do you coordinate?
That's fine, thanks for the micro. Thank you, Henrik, for the question. Also, thank you for organizing the conference. Indeed, with almost 14 million persons displaced, both outside Ukraine and inside Ukraine, it's a gigantic task in terms of helping the authorities. But let me try to bring some reflections on the fact that inside Ukraine, within the overall interagency response, UNHCR has a responsibility to lead and coordinate the protection cluster, the shelter cluster, and the camp management collective center cluster. And that's in a way to drive and direction. That's where a lot of the consultations happen with the government and also with other partners about how do we build for the longer term. So that's built into the whole thing. But let's talk more about the people, because I think this is where it is very important. Even though somebody was quoting to say that somebody believes in people and not in structures and not in people, we believe in both. And when we look at that, the intention surveys we have conducted over time shows very clear what people need immediately. There is, of course, immediate humanitarian needs. And they are not just once. It is, in a way, now a very dynamic and recurring situation. That's what, in a way, puts a lot of pressure. But secondly, what the persons have said, both in their countries of refuge, but also inside Ukraine, has of course been accommodation. How can I get accommodation? And once I can do that, how can you help stabilize my life? How can I find employment and self-reliance? And how can I lead further to access to services? The whole thing of normalization, in a way. And UNHCR works along those lines, first of all, in very close consultation with the Ukrainian authorities, very much at a local area-based level in terms of trying to help the local authorities and not only the central authorities, trying to help the priorities. Within shelter, it's all about trying to bring emergency relief to the shelter so that people can return to areas. And there we have been very active, especially in reconquered areas, and trying to bring normality back to those areas, even though it's very difficult, and as Linda says, requires then a lot of mind clearance and awareness raising, because these areas are very delicate. In terms of the provision of humanitarian aid, generally, UNHCR has provided an important level of cash grants. We have provided 800,000 persons with cash grants since we started in February 22 inside Ukraine, 1.3 million articles of core relief items. These are sleeping bags, solar lamps, and so on, all in a way in the area of trying to stabilize the population, help bring that strength to the population. With regard to the asylum countries, which I think is equally important, there, in a way, it's the same needs, but it's also bringing the employment. And what we have seen is, thanks, I would say, to the European Union's temporary implementation of the Temporary Protection Directive, we have seen that those obstacles we normally would have seen in many countries and many refugee situations, which is the access to be included in national services, or the access to be included and get into quick accommodation, has actually succeeded extremely well. And I must say, thanks to the good relations between Ukraine and all its the other EU member states, and also the solidarity from the private sector, thanks to funding from Denmark and other European donors and American and Canadian donors, etc., overseas, international donors, it has actually been possible to stabilize those populations. We have 40% employment rates amongst the refugee populations in many of the different countries we see, which is an amazing number, considering the makeup of the refugees, which very often is women with their children, and where the men have remained behind. So a lot has been done to stabilize. We're laying the ground. I think we all have talked a lot today about laying the groundwork for that. But when Torben mentions the cost of how much is needed, it's clear that all of us are chipping in a piece that hopefully will bring, in a structured manner, the solution to the situation. But it remains very dynamic, and we haven't reached yet a situation where we can build from a completely calm foundation.
Yeah. Ambassador, let me turn back to you. What I hear is that strong voice behind government leadership. We also heard a call for young people to have voices in this process. A quick reaction from your side, but also on the other points that you have heard.
Well, I would probably say a little bit different, but it really matters. When probably you remember, Russians started heavily shelling on the critical infrastructure. It was October and then November, so the goal was, let's say, to make a huge humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, and so that people would finally say to the government, let's stop it, let's find the solution. But then we made kind of the survey, and it was also, even honestly speaking, a surprise for me that about 70%, I think 78 or something, to the question, how long can you suffer, or what is the reason for that? And they replied, yes, we will suffer more. We are ready, 1 year, 2, whatever is necessary. Yeah. With the only purpose, we want our children at least to live in a democratic, prosperous, and European country, which would be a member of the EU in the future, if not our generation. So this is, in my opinion, that's something which should be kind of the guideline for everyone. Yeah. To realize that Ukraine wants and strives to become an EU member, to live together with you in one family where values matters. And this is what is the goal of this also war, why we are fighting until the very last, let's say, soldier, if necessary. So everything related to the future reconstruction, everything related to the fast recovery, etc., should be guided also by this principle, to make Ukraine our partner, our member of our family, and this is our primary goal. So I think this shows why we are fighting so bravely. This shows also that yes, we are protecting our own homes, but this is also our midterm and long-term dream or goal, to join the European Union, to be together with you. So this is my answer to every single questions about recovery, about reconstruction, about current state of things in Ukraine.
Thank you. Quick reaction from you also, Christopoulos Politis. You are on the ground as the UN's development agency, supporting the aspirations of the country. From what you hear, can I have a quick reaction from you as a final?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Allow me to pick up on the observation related to the energy sector, and very much aligned to the ambassador's comments as well. The energy crisis is both a humanitarian and a development crisis, and this is important for us to underscore. And while some would see this particular rehabilitation, restoration of the sector, and it is rightfully so, more mid to long term, there is an immediate need that needs to be addressed, which is the energy supply. So I'm happy to share with all of you that at the request of President Zelensky, UNDP and the UN system have been entrusted with a rapid assessment on energy infrastructure damage across the country. And this particular evidence base, and this takes me actually to underscoring the importance of making sure that we are building evidence while currently the conflict is going on. And so this particular piece of assessment is going to enable two immediate results. The first one is really to address the immediate needs of populations across the country and making sure that we're addressing in immediate terms their energy needs. And this is through our colleagues, HCR and other agencies on the ground as well, to make sure that we're providing energy equipment, which are more immediate humanitarian energy equipment, but also, and most importantly, looking at how to put back the grid in action and making sure that the grid becomes modernized, becomes greener, becomes more diversified, and then is meeting the needs of Ukraine, but also broadly of the region. So this is where we see that every single sector actually is an illustration of the importance of working in tandem, working through a nexus, but working in parallel on immediate needs, but also building stronger evidence for the midterm, immediate recovery, but also mid and longer term development. And one last word on the importance of coordination. We cannot underscore enough in a context like Ukraine or any other context globally, the importance of coordination, building the evidence, sharing data, ensuring that the systems, and specifically the national systems, are developed enough to make sure that duplication is avoided and also investment is not only optimized, but also transparently put in the right place and reaching common results and common policy priorities that, of course, are aligned, as mentioned by the ambassador, to the priorities of Ukraine.
Thank you. Torben Huus, I saw a reaction from you from what you heard from the floor. Floor is yours.
Well, I just want to say two things. One was actually mentioning the 14 existing investments we have in Ukraine. It's interesting to note, and this also speaks into the resilience in Ukraine. I mean, one of these investments, a wind turbine park north of Crimea, is obviously not in our control anymore because it's been taken over by the Russian invaders. On the other hand, the other remaining 13 projects are all operating, and half of these are energy projects and supplying energy to the grid still under very difficult circumstances, and the agricultural projects are also operating. We are supporting with emergency loans to some of the projects, but actually the conditions in Ukraine are really that these projects are self-sustainable at the moment. And it was more the comment on the responsible investments, because of course they have to be responsible. And I think the important thing is that as been mentioned by the panel, that this is done in a coordinated way by the different actors, that it is defined what is the role of the private sector in rebuilding the energy sector, what is the role of the public investments, what's the role of private investments, and how do we establish the framework conditions which will enable private investors to go in on a larger scale and be willing to take that risk which will be involved, and how can we de-risk these projects. And the more we can de-risk these projects with public schemes, the better the conditions will be for the private financing, and thereby the benefits for Ukraine will be that much larger. So this is really what the coordinated effort has to do by all the actors is really how can we define clear rules, and how can we de-risk these investments as much as possible.
Thank you. Let me open again for one final reaction. Please. We have more than one. Please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Philip Borton. I work with the municipalities. Some people call me a municipal fanatic, and I agree, that's what I am. And I would say, I mean, I'm so happy to hear that we all agree on using the existing structures and a good coordination. And then my experience with Ukraine is working with the ULEAD program, which has been supporting the amalgamation process in Ukraine before the war, of course. But as I hear from those that are implementing the program, the municipalities are still working well, and they are active, and also the quote from the mayor in Mikhailov, I believe in system, not in people. That's the kind of answer you get from a mayor. I mean, straight on to the point. He would like to do something, and he knows what is going on in the city with his administration, but he's afraid for the procurement and so to speak, that it will be done properly. So I mean, I'm just. My point is just use the system, use the municipalities that are not stronger, use them that know actually what is going on in the country and on the ground. Thank you very much.
Good. Philip, thank you so much for stressing that key role that municipalities are playing in Moldova. I cannot close without asking also, giving the floor to our colleague from Ukraine.
Hello, my name is Victoria Kondrashova. I'm a civil engineer working in a procurement unit, crisis response, energy and environment. So I had questions, but I mean, they were addressed here already. Maybe to take a chance and to speak on behalf of the whole Ukrainians who are every day working under the shelling, and also refugees who are hosted by Danish government, to say thank you on behalf of the whole of us. And I would like to say that we appreciate a lot the support, and this is exactly everything which was emphasized here we need in our country. And thank you, and we are ready to help all the colleagues and the government and the people of Ukraine. We are waiting for the moment when we can all, let's say, concentrate on the physical development. Now I know that we are planning, we are addressing the crisis measures we need to implement right now. But thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Mette Thyssen for final comment.
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Mette Thyssen from the Danish Institute for Human Rights. I think it's really important that you take this initiative to look a bit ahead, It's true right now. What is important is the war effort. It is the humanitarian effort, and it is the cleanup, as we talked about with the demining. But in the longer term approach, I think what has been said by the ambassador, looking at Ukraine as a candidate country, really is the key to all this. It is about time to revive the Copenhagen criteria, to look at how we can contribute to the institutions and also to the establishment of the market economy, as we talked about. And in this connection, the point that I wanted to make was to highlight how we need to build on the state institutions. For us at the Institute for Human Rights, we are working closely with the Ukrainian Ombudsman function and also your Parliamentary Commissioner on Human Rights. And I think as we move forward, it is about the responsible business and enabling the state institutions to take a leading role in the reconstruction efforts. So just wanted to comment on the importance of the state institutions also as we move into the private sector. So thank you so much, and again to underline that we focus on the human rights and the governance issues in the process. So thank you.
Good. Thank you so much. Any final reflections from Charlotte Slende, from Henrik Nordentoft, from DIMA? Yes.
Three quick points. One on the financing. I think it's very, very important that we actually, as Torben said, create the framework conditions for attracting private capital into reconstruction, given the very vast needs for reconstruction capital. And that we also pave the way for sort of new public funding into reconstruction, not to hollow out development budgets in Western countries, due to the very big size of the reconstruction needs and efforts that we need to see. The second point is on Nexus that we have been talking about here. And Nexus sometimes become a very academic endeavor. It is indeed extremely practical. It is about UN organizations working closely together between the humanitarian and development agencies, humanitarian actors like ourselves, working not to create parallel systems, but actually to channel the way for using the systems, the structures, the institutions that are in place, and support that capacity. Thirdly, I mean, while the efforts we're looking into early recovery, we're looking into rebuilding, and we are actually looking into areas that have become accessible to the international community. It's key that we don't lose sight of the areas where we cannot talk about reconstruction yet, but where there is a very critical humanitarian need along the shifting contact lines, the actual combat areas, not to speak about the non-government control areas, where we don't even know how big the needs on the humanitarian side are. So the international community needs to maintain a focus also on advocating for safe and timely humanitarian assistance also into areas that are newly accessible or not yet accessible for us, to create the corridors for people to come out and assistance to come in. Thank you.
Charlotte Slende, thank you so much for that final remark, which is also a very helpful note as we sum up. This will be the last note. We have heard today about a very clear reassertion of the aspirations of Ukraine, both on the immediate needs, but also on the longer term, and a very clear statement on the direction. You ended up referring again to the nexus, the humanitarian development peace nexus, much discussed, but in some cases also keeping the different actors in silos. I hear a very strong vote that for Ukraine we need approaches, and we're actually taking approaches that think about the immediate needs, but immediately think into how this will support the future endeavor of Ukraine. Very interesting points coming out, both on the leadership, the strong leadership on the public sector, central, but also the municipalities, their role was stressed, but also on the public sector. Also the clear statement, yes, we need investments into an energy sector, for example, but we also need to be insistent on responsible investment. We heard the government leadership, but we also heard a very strong call for the young people, for the actors, to have their voices, for us to find both right now for the immediate needs, but also for the recovery, to have voices into that process. On that note, I would like to thank you all for participating today. I would like to thank our distinguished panel. I would like to thank very much State Secretary Lotte Macron and our Assistant Secretary General Ivana Šivković for being with us today and for visiting Copenhagen in the case of you, Ivana. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you.